Hello and welcome to the AUA Focus Series, a podcast channel by the AUA Media Lab. My name is Armen Avakian. I am a professor here at AUA. I teach marketing to the MBAs. Today I'm going to be speaking with Stephen Ibaraki, and we're going to talk a little bit about AI, the future, and what it holds. Hi, welcome to Armenia, I guess, right?
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. And Armen, thank you for hosting this podcast and to the American University, Armenia. I didn't realize you had a connection to the University of California system as well. And I think it's such a marvelous country and tremendous amount of talent and capability in the Armenian people and the diaspora that exists worldwide. So let's elevate and go forward and have fun, right?
I was kind of looking into your profile before this talk and trying to get an understanding and kind of doing my part, as a host to research and some topics. And this AI for Good, initiative kept popping up, and I know you're kind of embedded in that. And I was very curious, what is that, and what is AI for Good in general, and what are you trying to accomplish with that?
Well, let me give you a little bit of background.
Okay.
So I've been playing with AI for a long time. In fact, I built a computer when I was 10, and it kind of had a bit of sort of expert system AI in it. And then I got into building the first commercial microcomputers. And then when I got into enterprise systems, I actually built the first enterprise micro-based network system for the radiopharmaceutical industry, and it had AI embedded in it. And that was back in the 80s. So a part of building or working with tech and AI is let's do it for good purposes. So something that's going to be positive and it's going to enhance us, make us better. It's going to help Earth's ecosystems or all life in some way. So that's what I mean by AI for good. So and tech for good. So under the bigger umbrella of tech for good. Mm-hmm. So that's going to be my purpose throughout my entire life since I was like 10. And I always been proposing that the United Nations kind of embrace tech for good and AI for good purposes. And even before the Millennium Development Goals came out in 2000, I was kind of trying to advocate for it, but the Millennium Development Goals in 2000 had no appreciation of tech of good or AI for good. So again, I was advocating for this kind of embedding in some way. Before the release of the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015. In fact, I even provided input into the development of the Sustainable Development Goals before they were released in 2015. And went to New York, and I would say, you got to recognize AI. AI is going to help in some way. And guess what? There is AI and tech actually embedded within the SDGs, and that was in 2015. And so I proposed this idea to the UN ITU. ITU is an agency that dates back almost 160 years. And I said, why don't we do kind of like tech and AI to help with the SDGs? And they said, okay, we're willing to take that on. And so I went on the road to kind of sell it to communities and to other UN agencies and countries and corporates, and that became the AI for Good Global Summit. So
I got you. So I'm kind of in the AI sphere. I'm a startup. I'm not as advanced as you, obviously, but I've kind of in that ecosystem. And I feel like, at least from my perspective, when it comes to startups and business side of things, I feel like AI is at a stage where it's more relevant to enterprises and businesses, right? Productivity and so on. Generative AI possibly, is getting there. But what I'm curious about is when we're talking about, a global good and, let's use tech and yes, let's use AI for something that's better for everybody. I'm wondering how you see that, kind of correlating with the average Joe. Because right now, day to day, is the average Joe actually, getting the positive sides of tech and AI, and how would that look like in the future from the average Joe perspective, not from a business or enterprise perspective, right?
Well, to the average Joe, AI is actually in your television.
Sure.
So if anybody has kind of the later models, there's actually AI that's in your TV screen making the picture better. So the AI is there. AI, if you got a modern fridge, there's probably a chip in it, or your stove, it has a chip in it, but there definitely in a car, AI, there's some elements of AI and vehicles. It's definitely in your phone. For example, I've got an iPhone. It's an older model, but the latest one that came out from Apple, the iPhone 16 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, the Apple Intelligence and
Yeah, but it has an A18 bionic chip.
That's right.
That's an AI chip, right?
That's right. That's right.
In fact, it can do 35 trillion operations per second. That's like a supercomputer in your head.
In your phone, yeah.
Yeah, but it's an AI supercomputer.
That's crazy.
And you know, when you're doing email and something goes into your junk folder, there's AI that's kind of doing that, or some kind of capability that's like AI, or sometimes you're traveling abroad and you'll get this security alert from your bank and it says, hey, your card's not going to work. And you have to call them and find out why. And it's because you're traveling. Well, there's AI sort of doing that. It's AI is protecting your system from cyber threats. Do you know there's over 50 billion cyber threats per day? So their AI is protecting. So when people think, what's it doing for the average Joe? It's embedded everywhere. It's just seamless. That's all. Just like when you carry on your phone, you don't know AI's there working, right? Or when you do facial recognition that you get into the phone, you don't know it's working. Or you go into the airport, and now they have these little monitors, right, where you just scan your phone. There's AI there. So the average Joe, it's touching every part,
everything,
every beat. Yeah, exactly. And you're becoming more aware of it because of the release of ChatGPT in 2022 in the fall, right?
Sure.
So then people thought, oh, that's AI, but really, there isn't anything you can do where you don't see or feel the impact of AI, right? And it's going to get bigger.
Yeah, absolutely. I was talking to a couple of my friends, and one of the positions they had about tech and pro tech, right, was that if you look at 500 years ago, the average Joe and the rich, or the top 1%, the key differences between them was basically the house and the land. And if you look at today, it's the same. So if you're a multi-billionaire or you're an average Joe like me, we have the same phone. We have the same TV in our house. I mean, ultimately, tech is an equalizer in that sense. And it's become so widely available. But again, how we're different is still like 500 years ago. Well, my house is a little apartment here, right? And then, one person has a multi-million-dollar mansion. But the tech is identical. I'm using the same tech, the same phone. It's the same microphone. It's the same, mixer. So when it comes to technology, it seems like that is an area where a lot of things equalize across the board and that's sort of part of this is, tech and AI is good for everyone, is because of that equalization effect as well. And I kind of agree with that positioning, that it does make sense that, my phone and, Mark Zuckerberg's phone is basically the same phone, right? More or less.
Yeah, but you're getting more capability at a lower and lower price.
Exactly.
Right? So there's kind of this democratization where all sorts of unbelievable capabilities just constantly dropping down, right? And that's why when ChatGPT, sort of the more publicly available version, dropped in roughly November of 2022, people were shocked. But it's actually been around. That kind of tech was actually being around
for a while. ChatGPT just had the interface where you're like, okay, now you can actually chat with the AI, and you get exposure to it.
Right.
That totally makes sense. One of the questions that keeps popping up when I talk to my friends that are not from the tech field, that are just kind of average Joe, brick and mortar businesses, etc. They're worried. There's some concern involved around the rapid expansion of AI, because although AI has been around for 3-4 decades or so, but the quickness and the acceleration and how it's being used. So what their worry is, and I'm going to quote Spider-Man here, right? So, with great power comes great responsibility. That responsibility of that power, should that remain, because right now it's not regulated, right? Or it's almost not regulated. Europe started regulating a little bit now, but in the US it's still not regulated and so on. So how much of this should be in the hands of, a very few people, and how much of it should be more in the public domain, either through the UN charters or any type of government body that could possibly regulate this? Or should we just leave it, in the hands of a few? I'm just worried about that. With great power comes a great responsibility, and sometimes people are evil.
So why don't we give a little bit of a historical perspective, right? So anytime something amazing comes out, like cars, very few people have it, and then it becomes democratized. And of course, it could be used for ill intent, right? Cars could, drive over people and people can crash cars and things like that. And of course, people are worried about horse and buggies and those poor horses, what's going to happen to them. And people who worked in that industry. And guess what? We managed that transition. Electricity was the same thing. It first comes out, people, oh my God, this is a lot of benefits, but maybe there's a dystopian side and a lot of worry. And it's going to disrupt people's jobs and things like that. And we survived it, right? Nuclear energy comes around, and again, a lot of concern. And it could be used for kind of dystopian reasons, but it can be used for positive things. And guess what? Ultimately, we adjust, and there are small nuclear reactors out there, and new kinds of ones, because there's a concern about continuous sort of carbon-based fuels. And then you have genetic editing, right, which has been around for a while. CRISPR-Cas9 has been around for a while. But, people are kind of living with the positive aspects, even though it's out there in the wild, right?
Sure, but their argument to that is all of the things that you just mentioned, nuclears or DNA splicing, those are all regulated. Cars, all of those are highly regulated fields.
Genetic editing.
That's the argument, right, that they bring. They're like, well, yeah, I get it, but guns are also the same. I mean, the gun is the gun or the person shooting it, but ultimately it's regulated. These are regulated aspects of our life.
They're regulated, and yet people are buying guns in a way that they shouldn't be.
Sure.
People can use all of the tech in a way that we couldn't. Or even on the genetic editing, you can actually buy a kit.
A kit, yeah.
To biohack yourself. You shouldn't, but you could. It's like $2,000-$3,000, and I can do genetic CRISPR editing on myself, or you can do it to animals. You shouldn't, because there's no kind of control over it, right? Yeah. So these things happen, and there's a lot of positive benefits, and there's kind of loose out in the wild, and people could use it in bad ways, and that's the reality throughout our entire history. Now we get to AI, right? AI's been around for a long, long, long time, right? Mm-hmm. As I mentioned, I was even playing with it and back in the 80s and before, right?
Sure.
And so it's been around for a long time. It's everywhere, like we said, right? You think, well, the average Joe isn't using it, but they are. It's
embedded in everything.
It's seamless. You don't even know it's out there.
Yeah, it's frictionless.
Right? It's frictionless, right? So, in fact, you probably will be using some kind of AI system that's
to edit this. To edit this video. Yeah, exactly.
so
Makes sense.
In fact, even the Adobe suite have all sorts of AI embedded in it. There's really massive new updates happening this year, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So you create B-rolls and connect different segments. It'll fill in gaps. It'll smooth things out.
Generative AI kind of smooths out the edges and so on.
Yeah, even the audio, it can smooth out the audio, right? So, okay, so again, should we regulate it? Because we got all of these, and it's been around for a long time, and you're absolutely right. People are concerned that it could be used the bad way, and we should have overarching regulations all around the world. And then, but there's this concern that if it gets over-regulated, then people don't want to
invest into it, and innovation kind of dries up. And sure, it makes sense.
I mean, is Europe the center of all of tech innovation, or is it other areas of the world?
Sure,
right?
Sure.
The question is, do you think the new European AI Act or things that are similar are going to be more positive to the development of AI in a positive way, or is it going to maybe counter some of the innovation? Those are questions that the audience needs to ask, right?
Sure.
I mean, there are different kinds of regulations being proposed within, like, California and in Canada and Singapore and other parts of the world. Some have been being enacted. And so you got to do a balance. So then the question is, we should have some kind of regulation and policies, but
not over-regulation.
Not over-regulation, yeah. So it kind of stops development, and people are afraid to use it, and become so restricted that it's not fun anymore. Or like in the case of the GPT kind of technologies. You put so much guardrails now that you can't actually have fun with it anymore.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So don't overregulate, but maybe have some regulation. And even if you do have regulation, just like genetic editing and people can biohack, you can't stop it.
Sure.
And there's all this open source that's out there. Open source, it's freely available. Anybody can use it. Your 10-year-old with a laptop can download one of the tiny open source models and play with it on their own and tweak it and things like that. You can't stop it.
So we're talking about the future, and one of the things that always kind of I think about is I have two sons, I have two boys, and they're trying to figure out their way. One is 8th grade, so he's already at the age where when you ask him, what do you want to be when you grow up, he already has a more grounded idea of what avenue he might want. Obviously, he doesn't know yet completely, but at least he knows he likes sort of like STEM stuff and the math and the chemistry, and he doesn't like, history and whatever in school. So he already is kind of, the small one is too small to understand still. He's 1st grade. So, but my worry here as a parent, and as a parent, I always worry, it's constant worrying, right? But my worry has always been, I'm not going to push him, obviously. He can do whatever he wants, but would it be better for him to go into sort of the STEM area, or is that already going to be overpopulated by the time he reaches an age where he's, part of the working population? So if you had to give sort of your recommendation of the next generation coming up, what would that be? What areas of the future are going to be more lucrative or more in demand?
That's interesting. So I'm old enough to be your grandparent, right? And kind of my dreams when I was younger, an 8-year-old, is different than the dreams of your 8-year-old and what's capable and what the abilities are and kind of our targets for a profession. So just generally, you're going to have a difference between people of my generation and your alpha generation. Somebody's born post-2012. It's considered alpha generation. Yeah. And their dreams and the kind of the targets of the jobs they're going to go through. Right? So what should they be targeting, right?
Yeah.
So generally, they should be as a kind of a philosophy, because we're going to go through unprecedented change, unbelievable change in the next 5 years than, let's say, in the past 2 million years.
Yeah.
And that's going to totally change all of society, culture, every aspect of business and governments and things around the world and how we live day to day. So you're going to have to prepare for that generationally, and not just your kids, even yourself, right?
Sure.
So some broad rules are you want to instill in them curiosity. So they're constantly kind of figuring things out, asking questions, exploring things. So that's kind of what you want to encourage. You want to encourage entrepreneurship, kind of novel thinking, running experiments, trying things that are different. So you want to encourage that. You want to encourage critical thinking as well. So they're not just accepting everything that comes in and they believe it all. Kind of you have to think about, is this reasonable? Is it not? Are there multiple sources from reliable sources that kind of validate what you're learning? So critical thinking. You have to propagate this idea of empathy or theory of mind, sort of put yourself in the other person's shoes and think about their perspective or that AI's perspective or other life perspective and sort of view everything through that other person's perspective, entity's perspective. And you have to be very agile in your thinking.
Okay. Willing to adapt, willing to change.
Yeah, willing to adapt. Being willing to, because when there's volatility, you got to be resilient, and you got to be able to adjust with those kind of volatility that happens. So generally, you have to have those characteristics, right?
Yeah.
And the ability to do what I call combinatorial thinking. In other words, you have a piece of information here, could be in music. You have a piece of information here, it could be in history. You're working with a group of friends that maybe kind of think differently than you. Think about the ways that those people connect. And in your mind, when you have off time, kind of connect these disparate or these separate different thinking ways into ways they correlate and where there's differences and things like this. That's kind of combinatorial thinking. And could you innovate by doing the combinatorial thinking? The other thing too is do a lot of relationship building of people safely, of course, where you're looking at different communities and connecting people of different communities, so you learn a lot from those. So combining that with, you can continue to doing STEM, but also read the outlier of STEM. So what I mean by the outlier, things that will stretch your thinking.
Okay.
And not just kind of traditional ideas that, are 50 years old or 30 years old, but also things that are upcoming and spend, I would say, a significant amount of your time looking at things that are upcoming. And there's safe ways to do that. Two that come to mind, I'm part of the ACM, Association for Computing Machinery. We're the world's largest computing science organization, lots of material there. I'm part of the IEEE. We're the world's largest.
And this material and this stuff is online and it's accessible.
It's online,
sure.
and you can be a member, and you can participate in things,
Awesome.
at conferences, and we have our own journals. And
cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of, or AI for Good with the ITU.
Sure.
There's like hundreds of things you can, hey, I want to be part of that, and I want to participate, and I want to learn, and things like that. So get into this
networks and the communities and the sub-communities.
So STEM is okay, and whether you're interested in being a doctor or other things, all of those things are okay. Sociology doesn't matter.
Sure.
As long as you're looking at the boundary areas as well, and not just the classical older stuff, you should be fine, right?
That's awesome. I think our listeners are going to enjoy that a lot, especially the students here at AUA. Thank you very much for your time. I really do appreciate you coming by, and I hope you have a great keynote for WCIT, and I'll be there, and I'll be your biggest fan.
Okay, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and again, hurrah to American University in Armenia. I think it's just a marvelous job you're doing here, and kudos to all the faculty. You're one of them, and of course all the students. I think it's just amazing what you're doing. So thank you for the invite.
Appreciate it. Thank you.